What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors gets pushed too far by a talk show host who thinks controversy equals comedy? Tonight we're diving into the moment Samuel L. Jackson absolutely lost it on Jimmy Kimmel's show, and trust me, you've never seen anything like this before. The tension was thick, the confrontation was real, and by the end, Jackson was ready to walk off set. Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment below, because this story gets wild. It started like any other late-night interview. Samuel L. Jackson walked onto Jimmy Kimmel's stage to thunderous applause, that signature confident stride carrying him to the guest chair. He was there to promote his latest film, expecting the usual softball questions about his career, maybe. Some laughs about his famous movie quotes. What he got instead was something completely different. Kimmel opened with what seemed like standard banter. "Samuel, great to have you back on the show. You know, I was watching some of your old interviews, and I noticed something interesting." Jackson settled into his chair, nodding politely, that familiar slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Oh yeah, what's that, Jimmy?" "Well," Kimmel continued, leaning forward with that grin that regular viewers know means trouble, seemed to have this habit of, let's say, embellishing stories, making them a little more dramatic than they actually were. The audience chuckled nervously, sensing something was off. Jackson's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, the smile fading just a fraction. "Embellishing? What are you talking about?" Jackson's voice carried that edge that movie fans recognize, the one that usually comes right before someone gets told off in spectacular fashion. But Kimmel either didn't notice or didn't care. "Come on, Sam, can I call you Sam?" Kimmel didn't wait for an answer. "Like that story you tell about your childhood, about growing up in the projects. I did some research, and your family actually lived in a pretty decent neighborhood, middle class even." The studio fell quiet. This wasn't the playful ribbing that late-night shows are known for. This was something else entirely. Jackson sat back in his chair, and anyone who knows his work could see the storm building behind his eyes. "First of all, you can call me Mr. Jackson. Second, what exactly are you trying to say here?" His voice was calm, controlled, but there was steel underneath it. Kimmel pressed on, apparently thinking he was being clever. "I'm just saying, you've built this image of being this tough guy from the streets, but the reality seems a little different. Your mom was a factory worker, sure, but your neighborhood had nice houses, good schools. It's not exactly the rough upbringing you've described. In interviews, you think you know my life better than I do?" Jackson's question hung in the air like a challenge. The audience was completely silent now, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. You think because you Googled some addresses and looked at some old photos, you understand what it was like to be a young black man in the South in the 60s. Kimmel should have backed down right there, should have recognized he'd crossed a line. Instead, he doubled down. "I'm not saying I know better. I'm just pointing out some inconsistencies. Like that story about almost getting arrested as a teenager. According to police records, that never happened either." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Jackson leaned forward, and his voice took on that dangerous, quiet tone that anyone who's seen Pulp Fiction knows means business. "Police records. You pulled police records on me." For a comedy show, the way he said comedy show made it clear he didn't find any of this amusing. "It's called research, Sam, Mr. Jackson, whatever. Look, I'm not trying to attack you personally, but when you're a public figure telling stories that don't add up, don't you think people deserve to know the truth?" Kimmel's attempt at justification only made things worse. Jackson stood up slowly, all 6 feet 2 inches of him, and the power dynamic in the room shifted completely. "The truth? You want to talk about truth? The truth is, you invited me here under false pretenses. The truth is, you've been sitting in your research meetings, digging through my personal history like some kind of tabloid journalist. The truth is, you think this is entertaining?" "Now, hold on, Kimmel. Tried to regain control? I think you're overreacting here. This is just good television. People love when we dig a little deeper, when we go beyond the standard promotional interview." That's when Jackson really started to lose it. Not the explosive anger you might expect, but something more controlled and infinitely more intimidating. Good television? Is that what you call ambushing your guests? Is that what you call trying to embarrass someone who came here as a favor to you in your show? The silence that followed Jackson's words was deafening. You could hear the cameras still rolling, capturing every second of what was rapidly becoming television history. Kimmel, for the first time since the interview began, seemed to realize he might have miscalculated, but instead of apologizing, instead of trying to defuse the situation, he made the decision that would turn this from an uncomfortable moment into an absolute disaster. Look, Samuel, I think you're being a little sensitive here. This is comedy. This is what we do. We poke fun, we ask the tough questions. If you can't handle that, maybe late-night television isn't for you. The audacity of those words hit the room like a physical force. Several audience members actually gasped audibly. Jackson's response was immediate and devastating. Sensitive. Let me tell you what sensitive is, Jimmy. Sensitive is a grown man who's never faced real adversity in his life telling someone else their struggles weren't real enough. Sensitive is thinking, you can sit behind that desk and judge other people's experiences because you've got a couple of writers feeding you research. Now that's not fair, Kimmel interrupted, but Jackson wasn't having it. Fair? You want to talk about fair? Was it fair when you decided to turn what should have been a professional interview into your personal investigation? Was it fair when you chose to question my integrity on national television without giving me any heads up about what you were planning? Jackson's voice was rising now, not in volume, but in intensity. Every word carried weight. Kimmel tried to laugh it off, that nervous chuckle that hosts use when they're losing control of their show. Come on, this is getting way too serious. Can't we just have some fun here? The audience came for entertainment. That laugh was the wrong move at the wrong time. Jackson's eyes narrowed, and when he spoke, his voice carried all the authority of every commanding role he'd ever played. Fun? You think this is fun? You think humiliating your guests is entertainment? Let me ask you something, Jimmy. When's the last time you questioned a white actor's background this thoroughly? When's the last time you pulled police records on someone like Tom Hanks or Robert Downey Jr.? The racial undertone that had been simmering beneath the surface was now front and center, and Kimmel knew he was in dangerous territory. This isn't about race. This is about accuracy in storytelling, isn't it, though? Jackson shot back. Because I've been on a lot of talk shows, Jimmy, and I've never once had someone question whether my childhood was rough enough, whether my experiences were authentic enough. But here we are, and you've decided that my story needs fact-checking. The audience was completely transfixed. This wasn't just a celebrity having a bad interview. This was a masterclass in how power dynamics work, how respect functions, and how quickly things can go wrong when someone oversteps boundaries they don't even realize exist. Kimmel, perhaps sensing he was losing the room entirely, tried a different approach. Okay, look, maybe I came at this wrong, but you have to understand, we live in an age where authenticity matters. People want to know their heroes are real. Heroes. Jackson's laugh was cold and humorless. I never asked to be anyone's hero, Jimmy. I'm an actor. I tell stories for a living. But my personal story, my childhood, my struggles, those aren't performances. Those are my life. And the fact that you think you have the right to verify them, like I'm applying for a loan at your bank, says everything about how you see me and how you see this entire situation. I see you as a guest on my show, Kimmel replied, his own voice, beginning to show strain, and sometimes guests get asked difficult questions. That's the nature of the business. The business? Jackson stood up again, this time pacing slightly behind his chair. The business is me coming here to talk about my movie, to give your audience some entertainment, to help your ratings. The business is mutual respect and professional courtesy. What you're doing isn't business. It's something else entirely. Kimmel's producers were probably screaming in his earpiece at this point, but he seemed determined to dig himself deeper. I think you're making this into something it's not. I asked some questions based on research. That's what journalists do. Journalist. Jackson's voice rose for the first time, genuine anger finally breaking through the controlled fury. Think you're a journalist now, Jimmy? You're a comedian who got lucky enough to get a talk show. Don't confuse your platform with credentials you never earned. Real journalists understand context. They understand the difference between fact-checking and character assassination. The word assassination hung in the air like a sword. Even Kimmel seemed to realize he'd pushed things beyond any reasonable limit. That's a strong word, Samuel. I'm not trying to assassinate anyone's character. Then what would you call it? Jackson demanded. You invite me here. You do background research, specifically looking for inconsistencies in my personal story. You confront me with it on live television without any warning, and then you act surprised when I take issue with your methods. What did you think was going to happen? I thought we'd have an interesting conversation about memory and storytelling and how sometimes our recollections don't match the historical record, Kimmel said, but his voice lacked conviction now. Jackson laughed, but there was no humor in it whatsoever. Memory and storytelling. Is that what you're calling this? Jimmy, let me explain something to you about memory and storytelling. When you grow up poor, when you grow up black in the South, when you face challenges that someone like you can't, even imagine, those experiences shape you in ways that don't show up in property records or police files. But surely you can understand, Kimmel tried one more time, that when public figures share personal stories, there's going to be some scrutiny. Scrutiny. Jackson's voice dropped to that dangerous whisper again. There's scrutiny. There's what you're doing, which is trying to turn my pain into your punchline. The words "turn my pain into your punchline" seemed to echo through the studio, and for a moment, even Kimmel appeared to grasp the gravity of what he'd done. But instead of backing down, instead of offering the apology that might have salvaged the situation, he made one final catastrophic decision that would cement his role as the villain in this entire debacle. Look, Samuel, I think you're being overly dramatic here. We're just having a conversation. If you can't handle a little pushback on your stories, maybe you shouldn't tell them in interviews. The condescension in his voice was unmistakable, and Jackson's reaction was immediate and volcanic. Overly dramatic? Jackson's voice cut through the studio like a blade. You just spent 20 minutes trying to discredit my lived experiences on national television, and you think I'm being dramatic. Jimmy, let me tell you what drama looks like. Drama is a talk show host who's so desperate for viral moments that he's willing to humiliate his guests to get them. Kimmel's face flushed red, and his own anger finally began to show. I don't need to humiliate anyone to get viral moments, Samuel. I've been doing this successfully for years. Successfully? Jackson laughed, and this time there was genuine amusement mixed with the fury. Is that what you call this? Because from where I'm sitting, this looks like a man who's run out of actual material and decided to make his guests' personal lives the entertainment. That's not success, Jimmy. That's desperation. The audience was completely silent now, witnessing something they'd never seen before on late-night television. This wasn't a celebrity meltdown or a publicity stunt gone wrong. This was a masterclass in dignity under fire, and Jackson was the professor. Kimmel tried to regain control one more time. You know what? I think we should take a commercial break and reset here. This has gotten way off track. Oh no, Jackson said firmly, holding up a hand. We're not taking a break. We're not resetting. You started this conversation, Jimmy, so we're going to finish it. You wanted to dig into my background, so let's dig. Let's talk about research and authenticity and what it means to question someone's story. Jackson moved back toward his chair, but didn't sit down. Instead, he positioned himself so he was looking directly at Kimmel. No longer the guest, but clearly the one in command of the situation. You said you pulled police records. You said you researched my neighborhood. You said you found inconsistencies. So let me ask you this. What exactly were you hoping to accomplish? What was your end game here? Kimmel stammered. Well, I thought it would make for interesting television. People like authenticity. They like when we go deeper than the surface-level promotional stuff. Interesting television, Jackson repeated slowly. So my childhood trauma, my family's struggles, the challenges I faced growing up, that's all just content to you. That's all just material for your show. That's not what I meant, Kimmel protested weakly. Then what did you mean? Jackson pressed. Because from where I'm standing, it seems like you decided my story was too compelling to be true, so you appointed yourself as some kind of fact-checker. Tell me, Jimmy, what qualifies you to determine whether someone else's experiences are authentic enough for your standards? The question hung in the air, and Kimmel had no answer. His silence spoke volumes. Jackson continued, his voice steady but filled with controlled power. You know what the real problem is here? It's not that you ask tough questions. Good interviewers ask tough questions all the time. The problem is that you ambushed me. You did research specifically looking for ways to discredit me, and then you presented it as entertainment. That's not journalism, Jimmy. That's character assassination disguised. as comedy. "I never intended to assassinate anyone's character," Kimmel said desperately. "Intent doesn't matter when the impact is clear," Jackson replied. "You brought me here under false pretenses. You attacked my credibility without cause. And you did. It all for what? For ratings? For clicks? For the chance that this might go viral?" Kimmel's silence was answer enough. Jackson shook his head slowly. "You know what's really sad about this whole situation? I came here tonight excited to talk about my work, to connect with your audience, to support a project I'm passionate about. Instead, I find myself having to defend my childhood to a man who thinks Google searches make him an expert on my life." "Samuel, I really think we should," Kimmel began, but Jackson cut him off. "No, Jimmy, you wanted this conversation, so we're having it. You want authenticity. Let me give you some authenticity. The authenticity is that I've spent decades building a career based on professionalism and mutual respect. The authenticity is that I've done hundreds of interviews without ever having to deal with anything like this. The authenticity is that, after tonight, I'll never do your show again, and neither will a lot of other people once word gets out about how you treat your guests." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. In Hollywood, reputation is everything, and Jackson's words carried the weight of decades of industry respect. Kimmel finally seemed to understand the magnitude of his mistake. "Look, maybe I approached this wrong. Maybe we can start over." "Start over?" Jackson's eyebrows raised. "Jimmy, you can't unring a bell. You can't take back the disrespect you've shown tonight. You can't undo the fact that you thought it was acceptable to question my integrity on national television based on some half-baked research project." Jackson finally sat back down, but his posture made it clear he was still very much in control of the situation. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to sit here for the remainder of this interview, and I'm going to answer questions about my movie, which is why I came here in the first place. But this conversation we just had, this is going to follow you, Jimmy, because people are going to see this, and they're going to understand exactly what kind of host you really are." Kimmel nodded weakly, clearly shaken by the entire encounter. "Of course, let's talk about the movie." "Actually," Jackson said, standing up one final time, "I've changed my mind. I don't think I want to promote my movie on a show that treats its guests this way. I think I'll find other platforms that understand the difference between entertainment and exploitation." And with that, Samuel L. Jackson walked off the set, leaving Jimmy Kimmel sitting alone at his desk, facing an audience that had just witnessed one of the most devastating takedowns in late-night television history. The silence that followed said everything about who had won this confrontation and who had lost not just the battle, but potentially much more. That's the story of how Samuel L. Jackson absolutely destroyed Jimmy Kimmel's credibility in real time. On national television, make sure to subscribe for more incredible celebrity stories and comment below with your thoughts on who handled this situation better. What would you have done if you were in Jackson's position?